So you're likely going to feel embarrassed as a graduate student, doctoral student, or a professor, and this happens to all of us. And so I actually wanted to talk about how to actually deal with some of this embarrassment as you're going through your career. It is a real thing that we all deal with, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about. So if you don't know me, I'm Professor Dave Maslak. I'm an associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship. And I agree with this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There's so many people that help me out that I wanted to pay the favor forward and help you out as much as I possibly can. So we often feel in school, we often feel embarrassed. A lot of us feel embarrassed. Maybe not everybody does, but a lot of us feel embarrassed for things that happen to us. And the reason is that there's lots to lose in graduate school. You're constantly thinking about, if I do this properly, then everything is going to work out. If I don't do this properly, then everything is going to not work out. And so for me, I'm always assessing myself and thinking about myself in terms of what my actions are and what other people are thinking about. And this sometimes creates embarrassment and feelings of shame, right? So what I'm referring to with embarrassment is really those feelings of shame that you get when you're self-conscious, and it sort of brings up, moments where you're like, oh man, what am I doing, right? Or it's sort of immediate reaction. Sometimes it's immediate reaction. I do get embarrassed and turn red if I get really embarrassed about different things, and that's just sort of a human reaction. Now, those of us with lighter skin tones, you see it a little bit more. With people with darker skin tones, you don't see it as much, but definitely it's there as well. The issue for me in all of these kind of things and is the more that I be open about myself, the more that I tell stories and stuff, the less embarrassing or less embarrassed I actually get, right? So the more that I feel that I have to hide something, the more that I actually feel that I'm very embarrassed about that particular thing because I don't know how other people are going to interpret my actions. So doing this stuff, right? So doing the whole reciprocity project, I have no idea how people are going to interpret them. So sometimes people do interpret this project very positively, and sometimes people interpret it negatively in terms of what I'm doing. And so it's hard to sort of interpret what I should be doing. And so sometimes I feel embarrassed about this particular project and just being open about different things. But that's just kind of life. And sometimes, what we have to realize is that when you get embarrassed, it is not any sort of thing that you did, or it's not particularly that you should be really shamed about this particular thing. Well, maybe it is, but what I'm getting at, it is, feeling embarrassed is really a function of who you are and how you were raised, right? So both your biological makeup, right? So some people don't get as embarrassed as much about talking about different things, but also if you were raised with, strong social norms. For example, in my family, we were very close-knit, very sort of religious, that we didn't do a lot of different thment and talk openly about some things as I was growing up. Now that's changed as we gotten older, but when we were younger, that was, it was a fantastic family upbringing in terms of dealing with some of these things. So whenever certain things happen, if there's some sort of triggering event, I get easily embarrassed about those particular things. So things, if we're talking about sex, for example, that easily embarrasses me, unless it's weird. If it's certain ways, I don't get embarrassed, but if it's other things and other topics, then I do get embarrassed. And so, these things come up on a regular basis if you're in graduate school, because there is so much pressure. There's so much, you think that you have to perform at a certain level in that if you do things and everybody's going to look at you, so you're very self-conscious about different sort of aspects of your life. And, there is some of that. There's some truth to that in terms of how people judge you in the tenure process and getting a job and things like that. So there is a lot of pressure that you feel, and you have to deal with that sort of feelings of embarrassment of doing something wrong. Maybe you did something wrong or you believe is morally wrong. So then you feel deep sort of emotions from that, right? So what I want to talk about here is, dealing with these emotions of embarrassment. It's really important stuff, but I just want to sort of, first of all, know that I want you to know that you're totally a regular person, and we all have fears and things that we feel shameful about. It doesn't matter, how prestigious you are. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what your background is and what you look like to the outside world, who you're interacting with. We all have these moments where we feel very embarrassed. It is totally normal, and this is being a human being, right, of dealing with these kind of things. And so the second thing that I wanted to let you know is the more that you feel open, the more that you are open about these kind of things, the more that I personally feel very relieved when I share these stories. So we often feel embarrassed because we feel like we have to hide something inside and we don't want other people to know those particular things. But, the more that I've lived life, the more that I realize that, man, we're all kind of really screwed up inside. We're all, everybody else sucks too. We're all really, really strange human beings. And, oddly, we think that certain things are very unique to us, but it's really not. Some of these things are very not unique to us, and we all make blunders, and we all make mistakes and stuff, professional mistakes and personal mistakes. And so we all have lots of stuff to be embarrassed about, and some of us show it more than others, right? So I have to constantly, so this is the third thing that you probably can do, is to remind yourself it's just an emotion. And there's really, it's not that important in your life, right? We all have emotions, and it's just a biological reaction to something that happened to you, based on your life experience, but also based on how you were raised and the morals and sort of functions of what you thought was right or wrong, sort of value system that you have, and that's going to sort of trigger some of these emotions. So sometimes people get very embarrassed about really things that a lot of people think are like, it's not really a big deal. And other people get embarrassed about, you can't embarrass them because that they were maybe exposed or they have biological sort of makeup in a way that it's very hard for them to get embarrassed. There's hard sort of trigger points for them. So what you need to realize is that these emotions, they don't control your actions. You can sort of have control over them. So you get that immediate reaction, which is totally fine. But then, you just address it and you say, oh, that embarrassed me. And then, you just keep going with it and keep running with it. And instead of thinking of this as like a moment of like, this is mortal shame and what the heck am I doing? You kind of just run with the punches. So maybe you're giving a speech or something, or you're giving a lecture or whatever, and then you goof. Well, then you just kind of address, well, that was really weird. And you just keep going and you roll with the punches, right? So I had this one time that I was lecturing, and for some reason, I just had this like bleeding thing on my neck. And it wouldn't stop. So I was really embarrassed about that. So I had to run to the washroom, and I was there for like 10 minutes, trying to figure out how to get this thing to stop. It was just weird. I've never had that before. Then I was embarrassed about it, and I felt really bad. And, even now I think about it, right? Like that should be something that's pretty minor. It happens to everybody. These sort of things happen to everybody. And, I still think about this. This was like 7 years ago at this moment where that happened. So these things happen. So don't worry about if you have those particular moments where you feel really goofy. The other thing to remember, so the fourth thing to remember is if people treat you poorly because of these particular problems or these things that happen, it's triggering emotions in them. It's not your fault. It is triggering things that are going on in them in terms of what they think is morally wrong, or, what is good or bad. And now some things probably should be triggers for being embarrassed, because they're universally recognized as like, oh, not a good idea to do that kind of stuff. There's lots of sort of morally wrong things that we sort of deem as morally wrong, and they should be triggers. But, other things, if it's triggering them to feel embarrassed or emotional about it, then they have to sort of assess what they're doing, and you should be well aware that it's not your issue that you should be dealing with. And so really take that to heart and think about that. This is not your problem to deal with. It's their things that they're dealing with. So when they have the sort of negative emotions to you, really take that into account. And then the last thing, I think this is important. So number 5, this is really important in terms of dealing with ideas that we generate, because the ideas that we have as academics, as researchers, as anybody, a lot of them are really bad, and a lot of them are really imperfect. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about when you have these imperfect ideas, and you just know that you just have to keep working at those particular things. And you have to realize that there's really no right or wrong to what you're working on. And it's just that we have to improve to sort of sell or get other people to buy into that particular thing that you're working on. So getting that moral judgment of the ideas that you're working on, and sort of removing that from the stigma of doing something that's not so good, because we all have not so good ideas. They all start out terrible. Just know that what you're working on, you're imperfect, your idea is imperfect, and that is fine. And you just keep working at it and keep refining it, and sort of remove yourself from the embarrassment of doing, whether you deem it as bad work or something like that. So hopefully this helped you out in terms of dealing with embarrassment. It is a tricky thing, but we all deal with it, and you're totally normal, and know that it's just an emotion. That's it. And, try to process it as just an emotion. And if people react badly to that, then it's their thing that they have to work through. It's not your thing that you have to work through. So with that, give me a thumbs up to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.